Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So we're going to be talking about JavaScript tonight. How many people are C#? Total is C#. Awesome. That's what I thought. A lot of people are. I totally came from C#. JavaScript was always kind of love-hate, mostly hate. I jumped into Windows 8, and for some reason I went the JavaScript way. Actually, I remember after being in this role for a couple months, calling a colleague and being like, I need out. I've got to get back to C# because I feel really, really bad here, you know? This is not a happy world. JavaScript just leaves me out in the woods in the dark so often, and it's just not fun. And but he told me to stay in it, and I stayed in it, and now I'm really happy. I'm really loving the JavaScript stuff. It's really cool, and the tools are getting better, and the performance is getting better. Not that it was ever really bad, but just the performance measurements, monitoring and stuff is getting better. It's really a cool world to be in. It's kind of amazing being on the client and writing this JavaScript. So we're going to be talking about all JavaScript tonight. Who here is a JavaScript head or a web platform person?
I've done both.
All right. So if I am talking to mostly a crowd of C# developers, I assume that you guys would maybe enjoy the occasional, this is the equivalent in C# of that type of thing. Great. So there are kind of two components to the presentation tonight. First is the app itself. This is called CodeSHOW, and I use this to show HTML and JavaScript programming in Windows 8. And the app itself I made, so I can show kind of the architecture of the app and how it actually works and builds the tiles and looks at metadata and stuff like that. And I don't know, I'll try to think about whether that would be more helpful. Or the second tier is actually taking you through the demos themselves and showing you how these things are done. Now, if you're just looking to see how to do certain Windows 8 things, a lot of the things that happen in here end up calling into the WinRT API, and that's the way it's done, and it's the same way, pretty much the exact same way in both JavaScript and C#. So you'll still kind of learn how to, for instance, tie up to a sensor or integrate with Bing Maps or whatever, whether you do it in JavaScript or in C#. But I'll go ahead and start with the overall app architecture. And then I'll move into a few of these demos. I'll look at whichever ones I think might be the most helpful for you. And then you guys can feel free, if you see one blaze by and I don't hit on it, I'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. And when we get to that point, you can say, can you show me this one? I've always been wanting to know how to make a custom control in JavaScript. Or I've always been looking to use the flip view control in JavaScript or something like that. And I'd be glad to show that demo. By the way, CodeSHOW is a project that of course, I put it in the store for free. I do have an ad in there, mostly just for display. I make like $2 a month on it. But I have it on Codeplex. And when I put it on Codeplex, I said, well, let's do this in TFS. You know, this is a full-on Microsoft product. And so I put it in TFS on Codeplex. And when I was trying to tell people to collaborate, I thought that they were going to be able to go into Codeplex and connect to that source control so that they could always just do get latest version, and pull it into Visual Studio. And I ended up hearing from somebody in the field saying, no, we're not able to do that. Apparently, I would have had to grant them as a contributor with their Codeplex ID. And then that's the only way that, I mean, I kind of knew that they would have to do that if they were going to contribute to it, but they would even have to do that if they were going to consume it, if they were just going to get latest version. So does anybody have any experience with that?
Yeah, you have to download.
You've run into the same thing?
File.
Yeah, so you pretty much just have to download this static file. Well, CodeSHOW changes quite a bit. You know, we add demos to it. We've got a couple contributors to it, and so I wanted people to be able to feel like they kind of had a live connection to it so they don't have to go seeking out the latest version. So I didn't want to use GitHub because GitHub is, you know, a direct competitor, and I know a number of people were using GitHub, but I was like, I'm going to stick to the, you know, the party line here. And then we started allowing get source control in Codeplex. How many people knew that?
From last time.
from last time. How many people have used Git as a source control in Codeplex? How many people have used Git at all? A handful of you. Okay. What are your impressions with Git compared to TFS? I'm talking just about the source control, not about the overall ALM.
It is the best source control ever.
That sums it up.
Stated simply.
I haven't figured out how to integrate it with Visual Studio. Like the TFS version was just automatic.
Yeah.
I have a GitHub project that I have to use a different set of tools. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit of annoyance, but
Yeah.
it seems to work.
Anyone else?
Does the one on Codeplex or whatever, I went to tfs.visualstudio.com and I set up my project.
Yeah.
Does the Git there integrate in Visual Studio like
Yeah,
TFS does?
Well, they both do. Any Git project will integrate in Visual Studio, and I'll show you how that works.
Okay, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Okay, so the reason why I want very much to show you how this works is this. Currently, I have 2 people, myself and one other, that have contributed to codeSHOW. I would like very much to have more contributors to codeSHOW, and I want you guys to see how it's done because it's super, super simple. Okay? It's just the creation of an HTML, a CSS, and a JavaScript file that does whatever you want to show off, and then you just add a little bit of meta information in the HTML file, and you contribute a folder with those 3 files in it, and that's it. It'll automatically show up as a tile on the front screen, and it'll automatically work that demo. And so I want people to contribute to it, but whether you're doing JavaScript or C#, hopefully this will help. So if I go to my Visual Studio instance, which mine is codefoster.visualstudio.com, this is all the projects that I have in my TFS. This is the service, not Terminal Foundation Server, but Service. Okay? This is all the projects that I have, and these can be private. So this is the equivalent of the pay version of GitHub, really. Okay? These can be private. And so I can restrict these to only the people that I've elected to be on my team. So I can build a little team, and as long as my team is 5 or less, it's free, at least for now. It says that, it doesn't say it here, but when you're not logged in, when you're on the kind of the public landing page, it talks about how there's going to be a free tier, but for now everything's free in it because it's just spinning up. But this is really cool that I can form. I've actually got a little game group. I call us the Underground App Dev group. And there's 3 of us, and I just give them accounts in here with their live IDs. One of them has a Gmail account, and one has some custom account, but they're all in here as contributors to my project, so that's really cool. Well, when you create a new project, you can create a project using Git, and now you get all of the glory that is TFS. I mean, TFS is amazing. I don't even really see any direct competitors to TFS. It's just awesome. And you get all the glory that is TFS, but your repository is sitting on top of GitHub. And so that's really beautiful. So now I can go to my app. This is one of my projects that is in TFS, but it's sitting on top of GitHub. And I can go to the Code tab. This is in TFS now, not Codeplex. Although Codeplex is sitting on top of TFS, they work a little bit differently. So now here's Little Pond, and I can go over here. It's a little bit obscure. I think this needs to be a little bit more clear, but this icon on the far right is clone. And if I click on that, it gives me the git command and the URL to clone this GitHub repository. And now anybody in the whole world, it doesn't matter if they have an account on TFS, they don't have to have anything TFS, anything Microsoft specific, nothing installed. They just have to have Git installed on their computer. They can go type in git clone and that URL, and it will automatically create a folder and put this entire project inside that folder on their machine. Plus, because you did a clone action, that clone will set up this URL as a remote. And a remote is like a repository that I'm aware of. Okay? So they're going to be working on their machine. They'll make changes, commit to the repository on their machine, make some more changes, make another commit, continue to work locally as much as they want. And as soon as they have something that they like some commits that they think add some value to the project, if they are a team member on this project, if they're one of my guys, then they can do what's called a push to that repository, and it will push those commits, those changes that they made up to that repository. Okay? You actually have to go up to your profile in TFS and create a flat ID and password, because otherwise you're logged in as your live account, and you don't want to log in through the Git terminal with your live account. So you go in and create yourself flat credentials. I'll show you that real quick. I go into my profile, and the Credentials tab allows me to go change this secondary credential. So I go set it to whatever password I want, and now that's my kind of flat credential for accessing that repository. So this is really neat because somebody can really easily do a git clone, and then all they have to do is do git pull, and it pulls down from this repository, pulls down all the latest commits. So anything that the people that own the project have pushed into it, they just hit pull and it refreshes. It's just like a get latest version. Okay? It pulls all that, merges it in their project automatically, and then they've got the latest. And they never had to sign up for anything. They never had to do anything. So that's really helpful for people. Now, this all exists in the form of Codeplex at Codeplex. And if you go to codeshow.codeplex.com, like I said, when I started CodeSHOW, I had this hosted in TFS on Codeplex. But at one point, I realized I want to open this up for more contributions. And so I want to host this on Git. And so I went into the source control, and I tried to change it to Git, and it said, in order to change it, you have to email this person. Well, that's a fun workflow in 2013. So I emailed this person, and man, they got back to me like the next day and said, all right, it's converted. I was like, really? I came and logged back in, and all of a sudden it looks like this. I've got, Git verbiage all over the place. And I am absolutely loving the way this works now, because I still get, since Codeplex is still sitting on top of TFS, it still takes advantage of all the things like work items and all of that, all of the other ALM features that TFS gives us. And yet, for my repository, I've got a Git repository. This one I think looks a little bit better. It's a little bit more clear that I can clone by doing this. And the clone address for CodeSHOW is just that. So I can give that to anybody I want in any forum. I can just say, here's my repository URL, and they can do git clone. They've got my whole project. Okay? Now, if they want to clone it and pull anytime they want, they can always pull changes. They can always get the latest version of CodeSHOW, no problem. But if they want to push, they're going to have a Codeplex account. I'm going to have to know who they are if they're going to push into Codeplex, right? So how do I allow just any Joe to contribute to Codeplex? Does anybody know the answer? Submit a patch. That's not in Git terminology, though. In Git terminology, what do they do?
When the BBK.
They fork and they do a pull request. Okay? It's actually easier than it sounds. I don't know why the terminology has to sound so arcane, but the first thing they do is they say, you know what? I'm interested in this project, and I've already cloned it, and I've already pulled it a few times, got the latest, and I've written some stuff on it, but I want to contribute these. So they hit fork, and what happens then is fork requires that they have a Codeplex account, because forking takes a public repository, like CodeSHOW, it takes a project and says, you want to duplicate that project in your own Codeplex account. And so now there's a mirror image of CodeSHOW that they are hosting. And that's the key. It has to be another publicly hosted repository. So they've just forked it, but their fork has an awareness of the real CodeSHOW, the original project. And so they can, from that, they can maintain that live link. And then they can make the changes on their local computer. And then they can push into their fork. And then once they've pushed some commits into their fork on their repository, then they can come here, and it probably won't, it will let, no, for me, since I'm the owner of this, it's only telling me how many people have done a pull request, which right now is a grand 0. 2 people have forked the project, but 0 people have done a pull request. But somebody that doesn't own CodeSHOW would come in here, and they would look at this, and they would see the option to submit a pull request, and they would choose which. They would give them their fork, and they would choose the commits, and they would say, boom, go. And what that does is it sends a message to me that says, Joe just forked your project, made some changes, and submitted a pull request. Here are his changes, and it'll show you all of the deltas on all of the files, whether it's XML or a CS file or a JS file or whatever. It'll show you all of those deltas, so you can see exactly what he did. If you want, you can pull that down to local and run it and go, yeah, that's really good. I don't see any bugs in their code. I think it's value added to the project, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that. That's why it's called a pull request, because he's requesting that I pull his changes into my project. So he does that pull request. I say, that's good. I pull it in. It automatically merges all of his changes into my project, and now I've got it. Okay? So that's the procedure for that. It's nice because Joe can be anybody using whatever system. I don't care what IDE he uses. I don't care if he's using Notepad or whatever. And he doesn't have to have any of the credentials unless he's actually going to fork. And then all he needs is his own account. It doesn't have to be a contributor in the CodeSHOW project. So hopefully that's helpful. Now, if you have, if you are used to that workflow of using your source control inside of Visual Studio, then what you want to do is upgrade Visual Studio to Update 2 CTP. Have you guys heard of Update 2 CTP? So this rolled out with the Git changes. There's Visual Studio, and then there's Update 1. You've probably all got it. And then there's Update 2 CTP, which is not being pushed since it's CTP, but you can go grab that change. I haven't had any issues with it. You can go grab Update 2 CTP, and then you can install the, wait for it, you can install the Visual Studio Tools for Git, which this just revved up to version 0.8 just now, and I just installed it. Visual Studio Tools for Git. Don't be confused, because there's been a Git plugin for Visual Studio for some time. It was called Git Source Control for Visual Studio or something like that. That's the version that looks at the Git binaries on your computer, the actual Git program, and it makes it work in Visual Studio. But this version actually upgrades all of the ALM and everything inside of Visual Studio. So you can go look at repositories, look at all the commits on them and everything. So I've got this. So let me try. I don't usually work in Visual Studio, as you might notice by my fumbling. But I can go look at Team Explorer here. And I can connect to, oh, I wonder if it's because I just upgraded this. But anyway, I can connect to a Git repository, and then it gives me all kinds of, I can see all the diffs right in Visual Studio. I can see the commits, basically the changes. I can see a big history of all the changes. I'm waiting for it to integrate a visual, like a visual branching representation, because those are really cool with Git. Git's like incredible with branching, and so it's really nice to be able to see all your commit branches and stuff. And I don't think that it's in that plugin. I haven't found it yet, but that would be really nice.
You can use TortoiseGit.
TortoiseGit?
Yeah.
And you can visualize?
Yeah, I mean, it is basically if you use TortoiseSVN, which
Yeah.
is the same thing.
Okay.
Bucket. And
Okay.
it shows you the visual stuff and everything.
Yeah.
And it also integrates with Explorer, so you can right-click and say add div
Yeah.
whatever.
Now, I don't use any of those. I used to use my source control in Visual Studio all the time, and I tried doing that with Git, and it just felt a little bit more awkward. I got used to the Git commands finally. I don't know what that makes me, but now I go to Git Shell. The easiest way to get Git Shell on your computer is to just install GitHub for Windows. If you install GitHub for Windows, it does it really nicely. It installs this Git Shell, which is basically Posh Git. That's the PowerShell Git. Now you have Posh Git on your computer. You can run it, and you can use PowerShell and access all your Git commands. And if you're a command line person, you're going to absolutely love this. If you just hate the command line, it has to be GUI for you, you're going to hate this. So definitely get that plug-in for Visual Studio. But now I get in here, and the thing I love about Git is that the repository travels with the folder. So it doesn't really matter where on my computer I put my development projects. The repository is right there inside of them in a hidden .git folder. So it's all there. So I've got this development folder, and I can go into, I've got my Construct 2 games, and I can go into that fish game, the Little Pond. And as soon as I move into a folder that has a hidden Git folder in it, it says, hey, I noticed that this is a Git repository. So it shows me the branch that I'm currently on. And so now I can use my Git commands. Like I can use Git Status, and it's going to show me what's different between my working folder and this Git repository. And it says there's nothing to commit. Your working folder is clean. Let me add something here. Let me add hello world. And let me add that to a text called hw.txt. Is everybody familiar with that piping command? I'm just taking a string and writing it into a file. So I just created a file. And now my Git indicator is saying there's been a file added. That little +1 means there's an addition. And if I do a Git Status now, it says, here's a file that I recognize, but this is an untracked file. Git wasn't aware of this file before, and we're not by default going to assume that you want that even as part of your repository. So I can do, for instance, I can do git add hw.txt, or oftentimes if you've got a lot of things to add, you can just do git add dot. And it adds that into there. And now when I do a Git Status, it says you have a staged change. This new file, hw.txt, is staged to be added to that project. Then I can do a git commit, and it opens up Notepad for me, and I can write all the notes that I want about what that commit was. Just a hello world test commit. Okay? All the rest of that is going to just be comments, so it's not actually going to show up in my commit text. And then when I close Notepad and save changes, Git uses that as that last commit. And now I can do git log, and it'll show me all my commits. That's a little bit hairy, so I do git log one line. That needs 2 dashes. Git log one line, and now I can see the complete history of that repository. Notice I'm just looking on my local computer right now. And the last one is just a hello world test commit. I just committed that change right there. And now I can push this up to the server like this. So I have an awareness. If I type git remote, it shows me everybody I have an awareness of, and I've named it TFS. So I have this shortcut in Git called TFS. And actually, if I do git remote v for verbose, it says TFS, and it's pointing to that URL. It shows it twice because there's a different one for the fetching versus the pushing. But in most cases, they're the same URL. At least for TFS, it always is. So now I can do git push TFS, my master branch, bam. And it's going to look at that remote, TFS, and it's going to look at what commits that I have locally that it doesn't have, and it's going to publish that commit up to TFS. All right? Same thing would work in Codeplex. This might take a while because if you don't know, a commit is actually a snapshot of the entire repository. But Git is super smart about never duplicating information. So if you have a file in there twice, it actually is being intelligent about the way that it stores it. So it doesn't. It's actually the repositories are surprisingly small, especially when since you've got so many versions. And now it's copied that whole thing up, and I now just added that commit up into my repository. All right. I think this is the way we're going. I think that the TFS team indicates that with with adding support for Git into the TFS solution. So that's pretty cool. Any questions on that? All right. Let's go ahead and open codeSHOW. So again, you get the source control real easily by just doing a git pull, or you can just go into the source code and download a zip file of the whole thing. And codeSHOW is currently a few little projects, but these are just components for one of the demos, so we can show off what components are. And then this is the start of a testing suite. Is anybody kind of an expert in C# unit tests? Decent. We're all kind of quasi-experts in it. We should all be better, right? We should all be better citizens and be better at our unit tests. Well, when I jumped into the JavaScript world, I was like, how in the world am I going to do my unit tests? Because unit tests don't integrate with Visual Studio like they do in C#. And I found my answer in another project called Hilo.js that the Patterns and Practices group works on. And it's really helpful. It's a really well-designed app that it's really a simple scope, really low scope app. It's just like a picture app for Windows 8. But they did it really, really right. Yeah.
What is the link or what is the actual name?
It's Hilo.js, Hilo, and you can find it in the MSDN samples. You can also find it at, I think it's at hilojs.codeplex.com. So hilojs.codeplex.com. Yeah, that's it. And it's hosted in Git. So if you jump over to the source code and then click on clone, you'll see the clone URL for getting Hilo.js. Now, Hilo.js is a project and then a test project. And the way that I learned from that app that this works is, here I've got CodeSHOW, my main project, right? And then I've got this test project, and notice I've got CodeSHOW in there with a little X on it. The way this is working is, this is a linked reference to another project. And in order to add a file as a linked reference, I actually didn't even know you could do this. I had never in all my years of programming done this before. You can actually, when you add a reference or add a file to the project, you can say, I want to add it as a link, and then it keeps that file in its original location. I don't know why I never ran into that. Anyway, it turns out if you want to do that for an entire folder and kind of automatically get all of its contents recursively, you can go into the project file, into the XML, and you can add a little content line in there and reference that folder. And so if you want to see how that's done, just look in the project file for my test project, and you'll see exactly how I drag. Actually, I'll just go ahead and show that. I'll take my tests project, and I'll unload it, and then I'll edit it. And here I'm looking at the whole thing. And if I look down here at content, okay, that's interesting. It looks like it has, I didn't know it was going to do this, and I haven't looked at it since I did it. It broke it out into a whole bunch of linked files. I thought it was going to maintain just a single folder reference, but it actually broke it out into a whole bunch of files. Wow, I need to look into that, because that's really interesting that it did that. I didn't have to add all of those. I just added a reference to the folder.
If you add another file later on, will it pick it up?
I don't think it will, which is the problem. That I was hoping that it would pick that up. Curious. Anyway, okay, so I can reload that project. Close it, yes. And so you can see that the test project has a reference to the real project. The reason why we're working in this environment is with unit tests, oftentimes you just create some assembly with a reference to your unit testing framework, and then you use that assembly to hit your project. But in this case, we have to be a Windows 8 app in order to access like the WinRT namespaces and stuff. So we create ourselves a real WinRT, Win8 app, and then we create that reference to our real project, and then we can access the stuff in that real project, and we can run our tests. Now, this testing suite is actually using Mocha and Chai. Those are two different test frameworks for JavaScript that happen to be really good ones. I'm really pleased with them. They're really simple test frameworks. So, and if you look in tests, I just have one test in here that's doing almost nothing, but it'll show you basically how you describe these. You'll get a much more robust example if you open Hilo.js, but I've just got one of them where I describe a test. Before the test, I set x equal to 1 or do whatever, and then I have a test, and it's structured when something or other, this should happen. It should happen that true equals true. In this case, it's always true. And so then you can run this test, and it's got its own UI. Mocha gives it kind of a UI. It runs in Windows 8, and it runs all these JavaScript tests. So that's pretty slick. Maybe we should go ahead and run that. Runs all those tests. Runs that one test in my case. I feel pretty ashamed having this CodeSHOW app out there with one unit test. It's ridiculous anyway. And doesn't work. Thought I'd run that before.
True is not true anymore?
Yeah, true is no longer true. It is a bad day. I don't know what's the problem there. Anyway, doesn't matter. Look at Hilo.js. You want to see how that works. Okay, now let's look a little bit at the overall structure of CodeSHOW. And this won't be much. Set as startup project. This won't be much, but the way I wanted this to work is I wanted to be able to add demos very easily. So I have a folder called demos. And inside of the demos is just a whole bunch of folders, one per demo. And for each of those folders, so for instance, for the, let's use the Bing Maps, I'll expand that, and each one is essentially an HTML, CSS, and a JavaScript file. Okay? The HTML file, I have these lines 6 through 9, lines 6 through 9 are these meta tags that tell the system a little bit about this demo. So I say who the author is, I give it some keywords, and I give it a description. Now, when the app first runs, the default JS file is the one that does all of the kind of startup stuff. It's the one that has the events to describe the activated and suspended events, things like that. And in here, I call when the app is activated, I call this load demos async. I can F12 into load demos async and see what that does. And load demos async iterates this folder, iterates the project folder, and it looks in the demos folder, and it looks at each of them, and for each of them, it looks for the meta tags and builds this information, and it basically builds up a file. And then I'm also storing some stuff in Windows Azure Mobile Services. I'm not finished with this piece of it yet, but for each of those demos, I want a person to be able to say, this demo sucked, 1 star, or this demo rocked, 5 stars. And of course, I don't want to just store that in their app, because I want them to be able to see the reviews from all the other people that reviewed it. So I'm going to be storing that up in Windows Azure Mobile Services. Kind of already am. And so this is going to be kind of a melding of 2 pieces of information, all the stuff that you get local, and then all of the stuff that it pulls out of Windows Azure Mobile Services. And it builds up a collection of all the demos, and does that once at the beginning of the app. And the important thing here is that the load demos async returns a promise. So for all you C# heads, you use the async pattern, which is really, really elegant. JavaScript's equivalent is the promise pattern. It's pretty cool. I would say it's maybe not quite as terse as the async pattern, but it's pretty dang nice. It's pretty dang nice. You return a promise, and that's essentially a task. So you know how your tasks are generic? You have a task of string. So you get a task back, but you get to look at its string. Well, we get a promise, and that promise contains a function that has a payload. Has a payload that is the value that you wanted it to return. Okay, so this load demos async, I give it the convention. I use the async keyword at the end to just kind of follow that convention, so that somebody knows this is not going to return to you a value. This is going to return to you a promise. So it comes back with a promise, and now if you look back at where I was, where this got called on line 28. On line 28, I set an app level variable, the demos list. I set that equal to, sorry, I'm on the wrong line, the demos loaded. I set that equal to the result of that asynchronous event. So this returns a promise. That gets stored here. And now anywhere else in my app, I can ask that question, have the demos been loaded? So now I know that nothing else will try to happen until that has happened. It'll wait for the demos to be loaded before it, for instance, allows you to navigate to one or something like that. Okay? So it's just kind of an interesting pattern, that async pattern, the way that things are loaded. You do need to wait for it. Of course, it takes milliseconds for those demos to load, but you definitely don't want to try to do something before that's actually happened. So everything in this demos folder is loaded up, including the Bing Maps folder, and it's looked at the meta information for Bing Maps. So it's looked here for, get ready for easy and powerful maps and apps. So let's go look here, and Bing Maps is right here. Get ready for easy and powerful maps and apps. It takes this from the page title inside the HTML, and it takes this from that meta tag, and it sets it up navigable and everything. So I can click on Bing Maps, and I can start to show you the first demo in CodeSHOW. So on some of my later demos, I've put more more information in here, kind of explanatory information. Here's how the demo works. Here's what you need. Here's your different options and stuff. And I've kind of followed this slider pattern where I've got multiple things happening, and they kind of get more advanced as you slide to the right. So for the Bing Maps, the goal with CodeSHOW demos is for each one to be something super simple and super low scope, so that you can just go, yep, that's what I'm interested in. I'll go look at the code and figure out how that works. You know how the MSDN samples are pretty robust, and they all have like 9 scenarios, and it takes a little bit of time to go reverse engineer the scenarios and exactly what it's going to do for you, and how how they implemented that. So I wanted these to be complementary to that. And so these are very, very low scope, very simple demos. So the first one's just showing a basic map. And you can see that the map works. And if that's all you want to do is start there and include a map, then that's the one that you should start with. But if you want to be able to move around on an app, like if you want to be able to go to Seattle or go to Kauai, then you can use that second one. Then if you want to get into adding some push pins, you can use this one. And then if you want to add a custom push pin somewhere, then instead of just adding a generic push pin, you can add a custom one like this, and now you can use any HTML markup that you want as a push pin. So that opens up a lot of possibilities. Now, since this app is, you've got all the source code, but I also want somebody to very easily, like say on their WinRT device, to go to the store, download codeSHOW, and browse some of these demos and see how things work. And so I added see the code at the top. So at the top here, I have see the code, and then once I go to the code, I can switch back to the demo. So this is just a little toggle nav. And when I get to the code, it looks in that folder dynamically and says what code files, and I tell it what are code files. What code files does it have? And then it uses the Alex, whatever his name is, that syntax highlighter that you may have seen if you try to use it for blog posts or something to highlight the syntax in your code. It's a real popular one. Anyway, I use that to pretty print this, essentially. And the only downside to that is that you can't select anything. And that's a big bummer. A number of people have commented in the reviews. You can't select and highlight and copy stuff out of here. So big bummer. But anyway, it shows you all of the HTML, all the CSS, which in this case is hardly any, and then all the JavaScript for that app, for that demo.
A quick idea, couldn't you add a app bar there to say copy code?
Yeah, actually,
Right
I could, and it would copy that entire code file. That would be better than nothing, but I found a JavaScript library that I want to plug in that would allow you to just go copy whatever you want in there. That would be better. Okay, so you can look at the JavaScript that it takes to do the basic map. All you have to do is new up a maps.map. Tell it what div you're going to be dropping it in, and in that case, your map options are simply your credentials and your width and height. So that's the Bing Maps. So now, this is where you can feel free to jump in and say, we want to see that one. And I'll be glad to show it to you, but in the absence of suggestions, I'll just kind of pick some of these. The canvas ball is a super simple implementation of Css Animation in HTML and JavaScript. So we just have a ball bouncing around on the screen, and you can see this one's obviously going to be mostly JavaScript, and you can see how to do that very simple. It's basically a really light game loop there. We've got draw and step, draw and step, draw and step, draw and step. And that's essentially a game written in JavaScript. Of course, they start to get fancier as you add this and add that, but that's the very basics of a JavaScript game. I got together with the guys that do reactive extensions and asked them if I could plug in some of their demos into codeSHOW, and they said, of course. And so I've got a number that begin with RX. One of them here is RX autocomplete. So all of the ones that begin with RX use reactive extensions. And who here has used that reactive extensions? One? Who here is even aware of reactive extensions? Just a couple. Interesting. Wow, reactive extensions is beautiful. There's a whole .NET implementation of it and a whole JavaScript implementation of it. And it is slick. How to describe it in one sentence? I always struggle with this. The guys that wrote it do much better. But it essentially is an event aggregator. It's the ability to capture a stream of events and respond to it intelligently as a stream. Manipulate the stream, filter the stream, merge the stream with another stream. So if you are running into a situation where you're capturing events en masse, and it might happen more than you think, imagine like mouse move. Mouse move is something that's going to fire very, very many times. And instead of responding to that event and asking yourself all kinds of questions in that event and having all kinds of switching logic, well, okay, the mouse just moved, but if his button was down, then do this, and if his button was up, then do this. And if you're running into that type of a scenario, then look into RxJS or rx.net, because it might cure a headache. Okay? So we're consuming streams for all of these Rx examples. In this one, I'm actually looking on Wikipedia for results, and so this is an excellent way to query for to do autocomplete in any sort of an input box. So that's a really good one. I have Rx Canvas Paint. Rx Canvas Paint is tracking events like when the mouse or finger touch and as they're dragged, and it's rendering canvas artifacts every time the mouse moves by 1 pixel, okay? So that's a good way to do something like that. Also, on a related note, the drag and drop is Rx for dragging something around on the screen. There are higher level ways to do that, but that's okay. There's a crop tool that allows you to crop a picture, and there's this funny time flies that follows your finger with a string of text. So, like, welcome to 1990 JavaScript. So those are some Rx examples that I have. Has anybody seen any that they want to see? Okay, let's look at a sliding div. If I have a div from off the screen and I want to bring it on, there it is. Super simple. Let's look at the Windows Add SDK. This one will show you how to bring an add control into your project. So if you see the code on this, you can see the way that we do controls in JavaScript. You know in C# and XAML how to do it. In JavaScript, here's how we do it. You have a normal div tag, but you give it these 2 attributes. You really only need the one in some cases, but there are 2 attributes, control and options. The control is the full namespace and control type of the control that you want to turn this div into. And then options is a JSON string that you want to pass into that control as options, as like attributes. And then the framework, the Win.js framework, is responsible for looking throughout your whole app when your app first runs and saying, find all of the DataWin controls and turn those into controls. So it's going to go through and say, okay, here's the element. They wanted me to turn that into an add control. So the add SDK is responsible for going and crunching that and turning it into an add control. Okay? So that's how we do controls. This is just a super simple one that brings in an add. And I like to sit here and just refresh this over and over, and I highly suggest that you guys do that too.
We should copy paste that code in all of our
Yeah.
same
Just
app
go.
ID,
Same credentials and everything.
Cool.
Here's a decent one that I just added for the latest video series that we did on MVA. This is the WAMS push notifications. So if you're interested in doing push notifications and you don't want to write your own service, then you can use WAMS for this. It's really easy to sign up to create an app, a mobile app in WAMS. And for employees, you can do the whole thing for free anyway. So you go into WAMS and you create yourself a mobile app. And I already had one for CodeSHOW, but to write this, I basically just went in and said I want to enable push notifications. I created a table, and I just set it up so that it's really simple. Really simple push. And in just a second, I'm going to see a toast pop up on the screen. What's actually happened in that time between when I pushed push and when that came down is I wrote a record into WAMS, into a table, and the script in WAMS said, hey, a record was added in this table, and it's configured. I wrote the script to pick up that record and call the push API and push that to the person that is using this app and this device specifically. Okay, so I've given it what's called a channel URI, so that it knows me and this device uniquely, and so it knows exactly where to deliver that notification. Okay. So it's possible from your app to just do a toast notification, but I didn't cheat and do it that way. It actually is going to WAMS and coming back and doing that push. Okay? So if you want to see the code for that, the HTML is obviously very simple. It's just an input and a button. That's it. The CSS is non-existent, and the JavaScript looks like this. I put my WAMS context or client, this is kind of the root of the SDK. I put it in my app variable, once again, so that you can glance at it there and see, or not so that you can glance at it, so that you can use it from anywhere in your app. Okay? You can always just do app.client, and you're referring to that WAMS instance. So I get the WAMS push notifications table, which I created in WAMS, and then I do an insert, and I'm inserting the channel URI, the message that the user typed in, and whether or not that message has been sent. And the way I actually structured this is every time you write into it, it enumerates the whole table and picks up any that haven't been sent yet and sends them. So if there happen to be more, it would send them as well. Yeah?
I've been looking at the WAMS push notification, and it seems like you can only send push notifications to yourself, which doesn't seem particularly useful. So am I not understanding something?
Yeah.
I think the common scenario is something happens and you want to send a push notification to the users of your app that are related to you somehow. So let's say you have a chat or you're playing a turn-based game.
Yeah.
So is that something that's supported through WAMS or not?
So the question is, can the notifications only be sent to yourself, or can they be sent to the right person? The answer is they can be sent to the right person. It depends on the channel URI. That might be where you're getting hung up. The channel, as soon as I've got a post online that should make this clear. It's called Anatomy of a Push. So if you go to codefoster.com/anatomy of push, it'll take you to this blog post. And what's happening is the green is you. You wrote an app on Windows 8 and you wrote a web service. If you're using WAMS, this is easier. You didn't have to worry about this. But your app, when you start up your app, you do a call to Windows and you say, give me a channel. And it says, okay, I'm a device and I'm a user, I know this, and it goes to WNS and it gets a channel and it gives you back that channel. Now you're responsible for storing that channel. So in the WAMS scenario, that's why you saw when I created a record in the table, I stored the channel URL as well. And if you need to, you can store that channel URL. It doesn't expire for 30 days. You can store that channel URL with user information. So as soon as the user launches the app, now you know what the channel is for that user. You've got it stored. So for instance, you could store it in a user's table. Here's their channel. And every time they open the app, you could refresh it just to make sure that you don't expire within 30 days, outside of 30 days. And then when something happens, like another table gets written to that this person has a message waiting for them, you can go to the user's table, find their channel URL, and send a push notification to that channel URL.
I think the key there is that the push happens server-side. So within WAMS, you determine that this other thing happened, that you need to send the push. So yeah, one user can't send a push to another user, but WAMS does that for you. Maybe that's where the confusion comes in.
So you write the script on the WAMS side to figure out. So if I have, like, let's say a different database that I keep track of, my logic, can I talk to that database and figure out which users to send the information to?
If your database is a completely external system, then you're going to have to kind of have, like WAMS is going to be able to do raw requests. It's basically written on Node, and so you can pull in requires into the WAMS scripts. And if you have a way of communicating with your database that way, then yes, you can do that. Otherwise, you can communicate with raw SQL calls to the database that you've got sitting underneath WAMS. And then what were you going to add?
Well, I was going to say, think of WAMS like a server that can do push. You give it and a push is effectively you have a URL and you say, I want to send data to this URL, right? That's how a channel and push, the whole thing works. So you can build REST endpoints, have your DB and a different server on a different machine. Whenever something happens, you can just call your WAMS endpoint and say, I want to do this action. And at that point of time, you can write whatever code you want. You can ask it to send push notification. You can ask it to update your DB to whatever. Does that make sense?
Right now, the first iteration of WAMS was able to do a push only triggered off of a CRUD operation on the database. Then they put in another iteration of WAMS where you can have scheduled operations. And if you have a free tier mobile services, you only get one operation that you can write. But if you go up to shared, then you can write more. And these operations, you can schedule them to run every 15 minutes or every 24 hours or something. Or you can make it so that you manually trigger that operation. So now you can trigger an operation for some other reason. So if you wanted to, you could have a database of users with their channels that are getting updated every time they use their app. And then every 24 hours, you could look through that table and say, is this user expecting to see something or expecting something to happen? Then go ahead and, using the channel URI stored in the users table, go ahead and do a push to them. And now you've got it happening on a schedule.
So another thing, this is kind of took me some thinking to get my head wrapped around it. Even though WAMP supports only CRUD operations that you can write apart from the scheduled task, you don't need to do any CRUD operation inside the result. You can just say request.respond and just write whatever logic you want. You don't need to save, update, delete anything. Right?
In other words, you can trigger a WAMS operation by writing into a table, but then not even actually completing the write. Because once you override that script, the insert method, you see inside the method the actual execution of the insertion of the record, and you can just kill it. Yeah.
I mean, it's not even killing it. It's like, just say, instead of writing it, you say, I just want to respond right away. I don't want to go to the next step.
Yeah. And it feels like a hack to me.
Hey,
that's all right.
I have to make a REST service somehow.
Yeah, if at the end of the day it works, it's not a hack, right? The push notification, the communication system in this anatomy of a push, I talk about what the messages actually look like, the HTTP messages going back and forth. But then WAMS makes it so that you don't really have to deal with that. So it's pretty nice in that case. Would it be helpful to see would anybody else like to see like my mobile service online? Okay, let's go ahead and look at that. Azure is one of those things I'm incredibly excited about. I love going to my dashboard in Azure and seeing all of you'll see all the stuff I've got going on. I mean, media services and mobile services and websites. I recently moved my whole blog over to an Azure website and have been really thrilled with it. Okay, so this shows you everything. It's not a helpful view in my opinion, but I'll go into mobile services, and you can see that I've got a few. One of them is called CodeSHOW. That's obviously the one that's sitting behind CodeSHOW. And when I go to the dashboard for it, it shows me, here's how this is being used as CodeSHOW is operating. It's communicating with this. And actually, probably as I show this, we're going to see a few of these hits for the push notifications. But if I go into data, I'll see this WAMS push notifications table. And then if I go into that table specifically, I can see the script for that table, and this is where that one is being done. Actually, I should have stayed on browse long enough for you to see the structure of that table. This uses, I love the way they did this. So it's sitting on top of SQL Server, or Azure SQL databases. And so you have a full SQL database, but it's wrapped in kind of a nice modern UI, not just the UI here, but it's wrapped in a NoSQL implementation, so it's really easy to read, write, and everything. And it even feels like NoSQL in that you can just shove whatever you want into it, but it's actually dynamically creating those columns for you. We call it dynamic schematization. If I were to send it an object, remember I was sending it an object that had channel, message, and sent. The ID is always just done for you. If I were to now send in an object that had one more column, it would actually go alter my table in my SQL Azure instance, alter my table and add a column to that table. And I'd have a number of records that didn't have a value because I made them beforehand, and then I'd have a column that had values in it all of a sudden. So here's my channel URI. Some of these might be expired now. Maybe I did them more than 30 days ago, so some of those might be expired. And then here's the message that the user wrote, and then those are all true right now. But all I do to trigger a push is insert into this table with this as false. And then how does that trigger happen? That's in the script. In the script for this specific table, I have an insert trigger. And this is, I forgot your name? Sanjeev was talking about this request well, here I'm doing a request.respond, but here's the request.execute. When you first get here, that's all gone, and it just looks like a request.execute. That's the actual insert statement. But what I'm doing is I'm saying, go ahead and do the insert, and then when you succeed at the insert, do this. So I go get that table, I loop the whole table and find all of the ones where sent is false, and I do this to them. And this is doing the actual push. So here's the actual push, push.wns, send toast text. By the way, if you're wanting to talk to an iPhone, it's just push dot, is it ANS or AWS or something like that? There's another object there for communicating with the Apple push notification server. And the same with any other push notification servers that we support. Hope that's helpful. In XAML, you guys know what grids are, right? You've been using them forever. Just the grid, not a grid view, the Windows 8 list of items, but a grid. Well, we got grid in HTML now, so we can kind of play on the same turf here. The grid is just like the grid in XAML. The grid allows you to define rows and columns, and then it allows you to place the elements in there, including row spans if you want. You can use it to create fancy layouts and stuff in HTML and JavaScript. And here's a fancy one that's just like a huge grid that I obviously generate automatically in a nested loop. But we've got grids in HTML, and that's significant. We've also got a thing called a Flexbox, and I think this is roughly equivalent to your stack panel, except that it also can wrap. I don't know if a stack panel can wrap. It handles its own. I think in XAML in Windows 8, don't you have to put things in a scroll viewer if you want to be able to let them run off the screen and scroll? The Flexbox handles that automatically in JavaScript, so that's pretty nice. You don't even specify anything as far as width. If your items push it to 5,000 pixels wide, it'll just excuse me. And it'll just work naturally with touch. So there's a quick flex box. There's one where I've told the children to distribute themselves. One where I've told the children to stretch a little bit, like allow them to flex. And then here's a wrapping one and a vertical one. And then this is kind of like an implementation of flip view, but this is just a simple flex box. And actually, this is the same type of technology that I'm using to do this swiping. It's really simple. I basically notice that I have this one peeking onto the screen. I did that by saying I have a Flexbox, and if it has the class of swiper, then I have some CSS that applies to it. And one of those is that every panel should be 80% the width of the screen. That means that the last 20% is going to allow the next panel to peek onto the screen. So now I could just do this. Well, if this was a touch projector screen, wouldn't that be great? And I love the way it handles touch in here. Notice when I touch inside, I need to turn on my touch points. Does everybody know how to do that? If you go to settings and type touch, there's this change multi-touch gesture settings, and it allows you to optimize visual feedback for projection to an external monitor. That's pretty slick. Now, when you want to show off how something works, you get a little touch point there. How many people knew that? I love bringing new things. That's excellent. Okay, so when I touch inside here, well, first of all, watch this. It knows that I can go vertical in that. By the way, that's not good UI. Not good UI. Listen to what I say, not what I do. If I swipe to the left, it knows that I'm inside that control, so it swipes to the left. But if I grab it and it doesn't have anywhere to go, then it passes that gesture up one, and now it's swiping the control above it. Yeah?
How did that work? No, I mean, really, I have had this issue. If you have a element that scrolls vertically, right? And you want to add horizontal scrolling to it too.
Yeah.
How the heck does the control figure out which direction are you intending? I mean, basically when you do this way, either it's taking a delta saying it actually moved more horizontally than vertically, so let's make it a horizontal scroll. Does this thing do it automatically, or have you done that logic in your code?
I don't have any logic in my code whatsoever. It actually reads your mind. And there's a different signature for I'm about to scroll up and down, and it reads that brain pattern, and that's how it sets it. No, it actually, exactly like you said, it looks at the delta of the first movement that you make, and now you're locked in Rails. So now notice I'm going side to side, and it's not scrolling side to side at all.
It's like if you have a list view and you try to do the same thing, like try to scroll. You put a list view on a box, on a page, and you want horizontal scroll to work. That just doesn't work when you hit the list view.
If you hit the list view and the very first thing that you do is scroll directly horizontal, it will work. It should work.
But with your finger, it's almost impossible. I mean, you're not a mouse cursor that you can do perfect 1 pixel scroll.
Well, I don't have too much trouble with it here. Like there I'm going vertical and there I'm going horizontal. And I get that right most of the time. I mean, I still goof it up sometimes. I want to go vertical and I go sideways a little bit and then I'm like, oh, he won't go vertical. Oh, I got to let go and I've got to grab it again. But I feel like it does a pretty good job of discerning.
Okay. I mean, I've seen this issue a bunch of times with list views.
Yeah.
So that it just doesn't want to scroll.
It's interesting the way if you go to Internet Explorer and you look at any page that pans, so I'll go to something like MSDN, because it's usually got lots of data on it. So it's got some, well, this doesn't have any horizontal though. So the way that Internet Explorer works is it looks at your very first movement, and if your very first movement is in the up and down direction, then it puts you on rails. In other words, it's only going to scroll up and down. If your first movement is diagonal, can anybody think of a web page that has horizontal width, like wider than one screen and taller? MSN? No, same thing.
The thing about middle, swipe left.
What?
The headline.
Yeah? Click on the headline?
You can swipe left and right on that.
Oh, no, what I mean is that the web page itself is wider than my screen and taller than my screen.
Okay, devices.
Can you zoom and then make it?
Oh, that's a good idea. I can zoom. Brilliant. Give the man a star. Okay, so now I might want to go side to side, and I might want to go up and down. And what it does is when I first start going up and down, if it was straight up that I went, now I'm on rails. I can't go side to side at all. And I like this because let's say I'm reading an article and I've kind of got it lined up on the left, and now I just want to read the article. I just want to go up and down. I don't want to accidentally get this side to side. I don't want that much freedom. But if my first gesture is diagonal, now it's wide open. From that, the rest of that touch point is wide open. Okay? If my first gesture is horizontal, I'm on rails. I can't even go up and down. But if my first gesture is diagonal, I'm wide open. So I got into the habit of starting a gesture diagonally if I want to look around a little bit. So you might want to get into that habit. So I didn't have to do anything special to make this work. I basically just have that same swiper control. It's not even a control, it's just a class with some CSS. I have it on the inside and the outside. And there's actually a CSS property, I think it's an MS prefixed property, to override this control so that it doesn't pass that touch up to the parent. It's in CSS, yeah. Yeah, it does seem strange. So here I'm able to swipe this to the left, but once I got all the way to the left, now a swipe still inside of there scrolls the whole thing. Same thing's visible if you go look at the list view demo, list views. So these are list views, right? And they have stuff inside of them, and I can swipe on the inside, but even in the same gesture, watch this. I'm swiping, I'm swiping, I'm swiping. I get to the end, and the whole thing starts panning. That's pretty slick. I think they did an excellent job with that. So in XAML, you have a grid view and a list view, right? A grid view looks like this, and a list view looks like this. In HTML JavaScript, we don't have both. All we have is a list view, and we tell the list view to be a grid layout or a list layout. Okay, so we just have one control. Same concept, but we just have the one control. So this is a list view in grid layout. It's the equivalent of a XAML's grid view. Okay? This is just a simple one, so it's just bringing in some data. Here's bringing in some data that's grouped. And so the code behind this is really super, super simple so that you can see exactly how to bring in grouped data. And then here's how to do an asymmetrical grid. Has anybody done this, even in XAML, done an asymmetrical grid? They're really not that, you've done that? They're really not that difficult. What you want to do is figure out what your atomic size, item size is, and in this case it's this one. I don't remember what the size of this is. This one is 4 of these, This one is too tall, and this one is too wide, right? And so when I bring this data in, I can conditionally say, I want this one to be a class, a CSS class that indicates that it's going to take up 4 spaces, 2 spaces, 2 spaces. But they're still brought in order. So the order of these is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can everybody see that? It's like this one, it goes here, 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 and then here. It happens to take up 2 vertical. And then it moves to this one. No, I'm sorry. Then it moves to this one. And then here, 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 which takes up 2 spaces. So then here, here. Now, I would really run into trouble if I was expecting to be able to put something here. In fact, sometimes you have to add some logic to here to make sure that you don't end up with gaps. So in other words, if my third item was too tall, like this one, then it wouldn't be able to land here. There's not enough room for it, so it would jump up there, and I would be left with a hole here. So if you want to do an asynchronous grid, you may have to do a little bit of logic to make sure that it fits together like a puzzle and you don't end up with any gaps. I imagine somebody's maybe written some logic and wrapped it in a control or something by now, but maybe not. And then, again, I don't know if you guys have done this in C#, but I figured out how in JavaScript to capture, not that I figured out like it was rocket science, it wasn't all that difficult, but to capture the loading event, or the loading state changed event, and figure out when the loading state of this guy changes. And each time it does, I can ask it, what's the current loading state? So I can figure out that the viewport has been loaded, so the basics have been set up. The items have been loaded, so all of those items are done. And now the whole thing is complete. And this was really important for me because there were some things that, like anytime I wanted to go kind of dynamically inject things into the items or go query the items, I wanted to not do that until the list view had been completed. And if I tried to do it beforehand, there weren't any items. It hadn't been built yet. And so this was really important. Also, if you go back in codeSHOW, it takes you to the scroll position that you had. Okay? At first it didn't do that. I don't know if it annoyed anybody else, but it sure annoyed me. I would go into a demo and then hit back, and I would be all the way back at the beginning again. It just drove me nuts. So I was storing that scroll position, and then I was trying to reintroduce the scroll position, but it wasn't working. And it's because the items hadn't been loaded yet. So I wait until the list view is loaded. Actually, I don't wait until it's loaded entirely. I wait until the viewport has been loaded, and it turns out that works. And then I add that scroll position, and it takes me to that scroll position. And it was seamless. Like when I did it and I waited for it to load, I would go to one and I would go back, and it would like go to the beginning and then flash to the end. And that wasn't acceptable. So now I've got it so that it's seamless. So that was nice.
Wasn't that way too hard? I mean, I had the same problem with my app, and I spent, I don't know, 3 days trying to figure that out. Oh.
Yeah, that was maybe too hard. Yeah. Anybody use Player Framework? This was really easy to add in. It's just basically an example from where I got Player Framework. I believe it's on Codeplex. It's a Codeplex project, but it's a wrapper for media that makes it so that it's got really good fail case scenarios where if they have this, then use it. If not, use this. If not, then use this. So it kind of wraps your media and makes it nice and safe so that you're guaranteed that your media is always going to play, that you're never going to be left in front of a crowd with a black screen. That's what it's there for. Who knows? Template items is kind of a fun one. Template items, let me open that again. Actually, I've just got to click here to reload at the top. When I reload this, you can see that everything kind of comes in on an animation. And we get these animations for free, so we kind of take them for granted sometimes. But it's really cool that we've got a whole animation library in both XAML and in HTML that we can capture. And on this one, I can click on any of these, and they disappear, and it uses the... That's not good. It uses the remove from list animation, pulls that item out of the list, and then you see the rest of the stuff collapse. And those animations end up being super, super helpful. I mean, if something just disappeared and everything else took its right place instantly, you wouldn't really notice what happened. But when you touch something and it removes it and everything else repositions, it looks more like reality. So that's really helpful. We always say make sure that your animations have a purpose. You're not just using them superfluously to add some movement. You want to make sure that there's a reason for it. A page turn kind of shows moving on, moving on, moving on. Remove from list shows I took it out, everything else slid into its place. So, snap points. Snap points make sure that as you scroll, you land not in between two items, but you always land at a snap point, and it'll take you there if there isn't one. I don't remember what the equivalent in XAML is. Does anybody?
I think there's something called snap points.
It's called snap point? Yeah, it might be a property. Might be a property. This one's done in CSS.
Okay. I think it's a property of the scroll viewer.
Yeah? Okay. Let's actually look at the CSS for that one, because I'm forgetting what it was. So here's the CSS. Snap points, that's a MS prefixed. I like the way MS has implemented all of their CSS. It's all, actually their JavaScript and HTML as well. It's all based on the standards, but where it's something Microsoft proprietary anyway, like snap points in apps, then we use the vendor prefix. But if this concept ever gets successfully through the W3C process and becomes an RC, then the prefix would fall off. And that's a good deal. So we're saying these are mandatory, meaning it has to land on a snap, make sure it gets to one, not only if it's close enough. So it's either mandatory or proximity. And then you have to give it the interval. I kind of wish that I was able to put the snap points declaratively in my HTML or inject them logically with my JavaScript and say, there's a snap point, oh, and then there's one. But I can't. They have to be at intervals. They can be at percentage intervals or at absolute intervals, but you have to set them at intervals. OK, somebody else pick one. CSS Animation. A colleague of mine made that one, so I might not know everything about it. Where is it at? Animation. OK, so don't click me makes me angry. Just makes me want to click it. So you touch it, and it runs through some animations, just the changing of properties on that guy, and then it resets. So if you see the code on that, you're going to see in the CSS where all the magic happens. Here's an actual animation with keyframes. It's the equivalent of a storyboard I believe it's the equivalent of a storyboard in XAML, where you get to say at these points, these are the property sets that should apply. And then obviously it's going to run through that. So this set of keyframes is defined as get angry. And then this property, or this whatever the element is, has this class, and we're applying the get angry animation for 5 seconds. And so that's the way we do it in CSS.
Simpler than storyboard.
Yeah. Yeah, storyboards end up with a lot of UI, right? A lot of angle brackets. Yeah.
But I hope no one writes that using hand and just like they use blend.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When I would suspect even here it would be very painful. Was it 0.5 or was it 0.75?
Yeah, right. Right. Luckily we've got blend, huh? The Netflix examples show there's 3 Netflix examples, and if you do the just Netflix data, it's the most basic, and I believe it waits until all of the data has been loaded, and then bam, you see it all load at once. And there's something goofy with that.
Waiting to load or with this data?
With the display, I wonder if that'll fix it.
It's overlapped.
Yeah, it's overlapped. See there, it's right. I don't know why it didn't work the first time it loaded. I haven't seen that before, but so this one is making sure that everything is loaded, and then bam, it's showing you all the data. And then the Netflix by 10, actually, so the Netflix data was bringing in a random, I think it's like 1,000 different movies or something, and so the letters like I and K, there's not even a J in there. They only had one movie and there were no J's, so the Netflix by 10 goes through the letters of the alphabet and says for each letter of the alphabet, do a different call and get 10 movies that begin with that letter. So it's just a kind of a different way to call it. So Netflix by 10 will end up with a bunch of Netflix movies coming down from the API, but there's always 10 per movie, okay? And then the Netflix trickle is a way to use promises intelligently to do the call, but bring them in and show them even before, like if I can beat it in speed. See, so some of them have come in and some of them haven't yet. It actually shows them as soon as that request comes back. So essentially, it's a list view that's based on a set of data that's empty at first. And then I do 26 different calls, right? 26 different letters of the alphabet. So I do 26 different calls, and if J comes back first, put the J letters in there, and they'll show up. And then A comes back next, so put the A movies in there, and then they'll show up. So that's a way to bring them in on in a parallel format.
26 HTTP requests, do they go in parallel?
They do.
After the stack will, the HTTP stack might.
I think they will not go out in more than 8 at a time. Yeah, the HTTP stack on your computer, there's going to have limitations. If you try to send out 26, it's not like you get all that much advantage anyway. And so I think that it's 8 currently in IE, and I think it would use that same number for JavaScript apps in Windows 8, but I can't be sure of that. Now that you bring it up, it makes me really want to go look that up. I remember it used to be 2. Did anybody remember run into that in IE like 6 or 5 or something? And so you go into the registry and turn it up to 4 or 8, and then all of a sudden you could download more things at once. Yeah, those were the days.
And anyway, I mean, they have persistent connections, right, to improve performance.
Yeah.
So it is system level override.
Yeah. All right. Any more that we want to see, and then we'll end here in 5 minutes or so. Oh, you know, the promises one I think is really helpful. The promises one, I tried to start by showing you the concept of what a promise is, and then by showing you 4 different ways to do promises, and then showing you some good syntax for chaining promises. So if you look at the concept, so watch this. When I hit start, it'll freeze my UI. Every one of these tasks takes 3 seconds, by the way. It'll freeze my UI for 3 seconds, which is not a good experience. So bam, my start button is even frozen. I wouldn't be able to hit back. I wouldn't be able to do anything. And then it finally completes. So that's not a good experience because I'm freezing my UI. The next one is kicking off a 3-second task asynchronously, and as soon as it's done kicking off that task, it's completing that progress bar. So that one's not a good experience because it's a lie. It's telling you I just finished. It didn't actually finish, it just kicked it off, right? It just kicked off an asynchronous task, but it didn't wait until the end. So what we want to do is we want to kick off async, but then we want to wait until it's done and then do something else. And so that's why we use a promise. Now we can not only say when we get done, but we can get the event that fires whenever progress occurs. So now we can show intermediary stage, and now we're giving the best experience to the user, okay? So that's the reason for promises. That's the reason for async. And in JavaScript, if you're just calling an async function in the WinRT library, like if you're calling show async on the message dialog or something, you do an await, right? That's kind of the assumption of the consumption of an asynchronous method. And that's what consuming a promise is. You're calling an asynchronous method, consuming it, and you do a .then. So the code behind this one, all of these just work the same, but the code behind that first one just does a .then to not complete that progress bar until the 3 seconds is up. Now this one is passing on a promise. This is the equivalent of writing your own async function, which calls an async function and then returns whenever that one is done. So you're awaiting something and then somebody's awaiting you, right? Equivalent. Creating a promise is the equivalent of creating your own async function, doing whatever you want in it and only returning at a certain time. And then storing a promise is the equivalent of saving a task of type whatever and then referring to that task later on in your app. I found a number of cases where I want to do this, like I showed in CodeSHOW. go do something and store the promise that comes back immediately right here. And then at various places in the app, I'm going to go ask that promise. Are you done? Did you finish? And if it finished a long time ago, it'll just happen right away. So that's great. I'll just go, if that is done, if that promise has been fulfilled, then go ahead and do this. How do you do that in C#? Do you do task like is complete or await task? You still just await it?
So you take the variable, you go do whatever, and then you await when you finally want to block.
Okay. Awesome.
Are there any libraries and promises? Like if you wanted to queue up a lot of fancy things in the task library, there are parallel tasks and different ways of executing them. Is there any library like that?
So no, there's not something necessarily like the TPL, but we do have parallelism, but you have to spin off different web workers, they're called. And it's a web standard. And you can use these web workers, but it's not integrated with the promise pattern necessarily. So I'm sure there's a good pattern to utilize it well, where you can, inside of your promises, you can launch a different web worker. And then you're kind of doing roughly the same thing. But I've used the TPL a lot, and it just kind of merges the two concepts and makes it nice and easy for you. It's not quite that nice, in my experience. There might, unless there's something that I'm missing, but it's not quite that nice. You can join a bunch of promises together. So I've got 26 different promises out there, and I can join them, meaning wait until all 26 have completed and then do something. You can really easily wrap anything you want in a promise. So if you're returning a value and who you're returning it to is expecting a promise, you can just do winjs.promise.as and then pass your string, and it'll pass it as a promise with a string in it. So there's a number of things that help you with promises. And then the chaining is just some of these 3-second events happening one right after another. So this one's not so helpful unless you see the code, but it shows you the right way and the wrong way to do your chaining. So in C#, you kind of have to do it right. Await this, await this, await this, await this, right? In JavaScript, we actually have a little function thing. So if you look in the wrong way to do it, in my comment here, you start ending up with the Christmas tree pattern. If you're nesting inside of your then, you're nesting another promise and another one and another one and another one, and pretty soon you're way deep. This is the better way to do that. It's cool the way it works because inside of a then function, whatever you return, even if it's not a promise, will get wrapped with a promise. And it's kind of passed on, not passed on, but the next dot then that you have is tacked on to it. And so this one's always receiving a promise. So you could return a string. And then in this next then, you could capture that string as a parameter and return an integer, and then capture that integer as a parameter. And we use a then-then-done pattern. Then-then-done. That means that we always use thens until the last one, and that one's a done, because it has a special way of handling exceptions. It makes sure that you haven't let any exceptions just get swallowed. Okay, I'll bring it back to the main screen here, and if there's any more that you guys want to see, let me know. Otherwise, we can just kind of turn social. And
I was just curious about the encryption one.
So the cryptography and encryption, this one I'm not very proud of. It basically, it doesn't help you too much unless you go back and see the code. And I had to show this in a presentation, and so I had to have something in here. But all it really does is run some of the same things that you see in the sample on MSDN. So I would just go look at the samples on MSDN. They're a lot better than this one. It'll do a couple of simple things, like you can create a SHA.
Comment about this one. So this is kind of orthogonal, but you have the base64 encoding and decoding, right? If you ever wanted to save a canvas as an image, when you call canvas.toData URL, it converts it to a base64 string.
Oh wow!
And then you can use the base64 decoder to actually convert it to an image and save it or whatever.
Oh,
so if you have a game and you want to save the current state, then you can do that.
And is that the only way to save an image from a canvas?
And I spent a month trying to do that. That's all I know.
Wow, that's really cool though.
You call .toData URL, and that converts the image to this image thing with the source set to the entire base64.
Yeah, right.
And then you take it and you convert it, and it's a PNG string.
So that's the same. That's the same thing as if I do like URL.createObject URL to source to take an image, turn it into a base64 string, and set it as the source of an image, right? That's really cool. That one is used in the media capture demo. Demo, the first one is image, the second one is video, and the third one is audio. And for the image, you capture, and it launches the camera capture UI. So there I am, and I touch it. And then I can crop it if I want. And I'll get it roughly, that's a terrible picture. I'll get it roughly right, and then I'll hit OK, and I didn't get it roughly right. But now it has converted that to a blob, to a base 64 string, and set that as the source of this. So I didn't actually save an image on disk and then set it as the source of the image tag. Instead, I actually created an object URL and did it that way.
And just one more thing. If you want to know how to send this thing across the shared charm, I have a blog post on that. It took me 2 months, and the guy who developed the code for shared charm to figure that out.
Okay.
You just want to share the image.
You have a blog post?
Yes.
Will you email it to me?
Sure.
Great. Excellent. Because I have an app that I'd love to use that in, actually. I forget exactly how I'm doing it.
I mean, you can save it locally and then share it, but that's a really ugly way. I mean, when you
Yeah.
already have it in memory.
Agreed. Agreed. That's really helpful. Yes?
I just wanted to make the announcement that our aka.ms Meet My Apps form is now live. So go sign up now if you want to present in 2 weeks from today.
And we'll just basically take those first come, first serve, or?
Yeah, it'll be first come, first serve. We might select more than one if we have a ton of people sign up.
Yeah.
But we'll try to keep it at a minimum, at a maximum, probably 2 or 3 per week.
Yeah. I'd say 2 so that we can spend 5 to 10 minutes on one.
Exactly, and then that way you have a more exciting platform to talk about your app.
Yeah. Anybody know that they're going to go sign up for one? Can you raise your hand if you're going to go sign up and show something? Awesome. Good. We'll have a few then. That's good. Flyouts are one of those areas that are easier in HTML JavaScript than they are in XAML. The flyout, you can pass an anchor, and that's where the flyout appears. And in XAML, you can't easily make a flyout appear in a certain spot. I guess in the Calypso package, there's a fix for that. But it's really easy for us to hit flyout and say, that button is the anchor for my flyout, and I want to show up on the right side of it. So boom, it brings that up. Anyway, that's it. Let's go ahead and fold, huh? So feel free to stick around. I'm going to be around for a few minutes. Feel free to help us finish off those sandwiches or take a couple home. And the next meetup is not entirely confirmed, but it's 2 weeks away. So you'll get an invite hopefully sooner than you did on this one. I think I just sent out the invite 4 days ago. So sorry about that. But the next one is supposed to be on SkyDrive and live integration. So. Cool. Oh, question or comment?
To make a quick comment, just a reminder. If you guys know anybody, employees, vendors, interns that would be interested in joining us, go ahead and forward them our meeting invites and encourage them to sign up for the Apex Best FTE alias. And Jeremy includes that in his notes that he sends out each week. But I just wanted to remind you guys, help us get the word out. The more people we have coming to these, the more we can spend on tasty treats and prizes for our hackathon that we end up doing. So I just want to make sure and remind everybody, help us get the word out if you guys think these are cool events to have.
I'm likely going to send a poster soon and ask you if you'll post it in your building on a common billboard or something so we can get the word out to more people. So, cool. Thanks for coming.